let's bring in Jan right now because the Mets are front and center. And this is your day, Jan, to brag and talk and give us some insight about your team. You must be happy about that, no?
I mean, I'm understanding why they dealt K-Rod. I don't know if I'd use the terminology happy. I mean, given the situation and what's gone on with this organization the last couple of years, it's somewhat embarrassing in terms of what's happened. But it is a situation based upon the contract that Omar Minaya gave him and the vesting option that existed for next year, which likely, given the few opportunities that he would have had in the marketplace when he signed for 3 years, $37 million, it really wasn't required to give him the $17.5 million option. But because of that, and the way that Terry Collins has used him, and I give him full credit for not shying away from using him because of the vesting option and looking to do the best job he could possible to help the team along, that he was in the position where the likelihood he was going to vest it. He'd already completed 34 games on pace for 61 to be finished, which would have vested the option. So the Mets, to a certain extent, had to make a move, and obviously had to make a move prior to the trading deadline because of the fact that if he went anywhere, it would have to be as a setup guy. You don't want to give him too many other chances of closing games, whereby it would make it difficult to deal him because his option would vest elsewhere.
Right. All right, so let me tell you what I've read and heard, and you as a guy who not only covers this team for RotoWire.com, but lives and dies with this Mets team, tell me where I'm wrong or give us some more insight into these things. So What I've heard is the Mets payroll around $140 million or whatever it is, that they want to get down to about $120 million. Is that a fact?
That's been the rumored amount. Again, there's been a lot of, questions within the marketplace as to what exactly that figure is, and a lot of it may depend on what the finances, which David Einhorn, who's buying $200 million, who was giving them, quote-unquote, a $200 million loan, what that money is going to be used for. But yes, I've heard ranges anywhere from 90 some people on the low end to 120, but I would expect it settles in somewhere probably between 110 and 120 seems reasonable.
All right, so again, as Jan and I talked this through, this is the RotoWire segment, so be smart enough, folks, to listen in and get some fantasy advice and analysis, because if the Mets are selling, they are one of those teams that some of their talented guys who've had great or good fantasy seasons could end up in other places, and you really got to think about that from a fantasy value, whether you're buying or selling in your league, or you might want to acquire one of these guys. Oh, by the way, while your trading deadline, mine in my league is July 29th, is probably right upon you. So let's start with that general question, Jan. Is this a sign that the Mets are definitely in sell mode? I mean, you could argue they're competing for a wild card.
Yeah, I mean, they're 7.5 games behind the Braves, 11 games behind the the Phillies in the division. They're on the cusp of basically being in contention, not like a couple of years ago when they were 6 games out and dealt Kazmir for Zambrano, as well as some of the other trades they made. But yeah, they are on the cusp of contending. And again, a lot of it may depend if David Wright will be back by the end of the month, if Ike Davis can be back sometime in August, what happens with Johan Santana. But for all intents and purposes, I would say they're very borderline contenders. I'd say Atlanta's a much, much, much better team than they are, and they'll probably be fighting Philly for the division of the wild card. So they're on the outskirts to a certain extent looking in. I don't know whether or not I would quantify them as a contender, and whether or not it puts them in sell mode. I don't think the K-Rod trade does, only because the fact is it had been rumored for so long. The likelihood it was going to be they were going to try to get rid of him because of the fact of this vesting option. They want to free up some salary for next year to potentially be used on other pieces. So I think more of a definitive answer if they're a seller will be if Carlos Beltran gets traded. Again, They can't offer Beltran arbitration. Nobody can offer him arbitration given the way the deal is constructed, so there's no benefit for them holding on to him and offering him arbitration because you're not going to get the draft picks, whereby you might have had that potentially, for example, with a Jose Reyes if you had held on to him and then offered him arbitration. But on Beltran's case, they don't get anything, so either they hold on to him and potentially be contenders or view themselves as contenders, or B, try to hopefully assume that the fan base will stay around and come if they are in contention and Beltran's there, or C, they determine that they want to deal him, get the best deal possible with teams that could use him, a la San Francisco, maybe a Boston. There's a lot of teams that need middle-of-the-lineup help. If they do deal Beltran, that's a pretty good signal that the white flag has gone up and you can write off the season.